Good morning. Welcome to English Miller. Today, we analyze two major periods, the Restoration and the 18th century. Remember, this is an overview of two major periods, the Restoration and the 18th century. The Restoration period begins in 1660, the year in which King Charles II, the exiled Stuart king, was restored to the English throne. England, Scotland, and Wales were united as Great Britain by the 1707 Act of Union. The period is one of increasing commercial prosperity and global trade for Britain. Literacy expanded to include the middle classes and even some of the poor. Emerging social ideas included politeness, a behavior standard to which anyone might aspire, and new rhetoric of liberty and rights, sentiment and sympathy. The monarchical restoration was accompanied by the reopening of English theatres closed during Cromwell's Puritan regime, and the restoration of the Church of England as the national church. Church and state continued to be closely intertwined. The Test Act of 1673 required all holders of civil and military offices to take the sacrament in Anglican Church and deny transubstantiation. Those who refused, example Protestant dissenters and Roman Catholics, were not allowed to attend university or hold public office. King Charles II, though he outwardly conformed to Anglicanism, had Catholic sympathies that placed him at odds with his strongly anti-Catholic Parliament. Charles had no legitimate heir. His brother James, a Catholic, was next in line to the throne. Parliament tried to force Charles to exclude his brother from the line of succession. Charles entered this exclusion crisis by dissolving Parliament. The exclusion crisis, in a sense, created modern political parties, the Tories, who supported the king, and the Whigs, who opposed to him. Once crowned, King James II quickly suspended the Test Act. In 1688, the birth of James' son so alarmed the country with the prospect of a new succession of Catholic monarchs that secret negotiations began to bring a new Protestant ruler from Europe to oust James. In 1688, William of Orange and his wife Mary, James' daughter, landed in England with a small army and seized power, an event known as the Glorious or Bloodless Revolution. James II fled to exile in France. For over 50 years, his supporters, called Jacobites, from the Latin Jacobus for James, mounted unsuccessful attempts to restore the Stuart line of Catholic kings to the British throne. Queen Anne, another of James II's daughters, was the next monarch, 1702 to 1714. Anne's reign was a prosperous time for Britain. At the War of the Spanish Succession, 1702 to 1713, created new trade opportunities. England, Scotland, and Wales were united as Great Britain by the 1707 Act of Union. As Anne, like Mary, had no heirs, the succession was settled upon the royal house of Hanover. A long line of King George I to V ensued, which is why the 18th century is also known as the Georgian period. We now associate the term Whig with liberalism and Tory with conservatism, but the principles behind these two parties remained fluid and responsive to political circumstance throughout the period. Robert Walpole, a Whig politician, who served under both King George I and George II, held a parliamentary seat from 1701 until 1742. Walpole was the first man to be described as a prime minister. During King George III's long rule, 1760 to 1820, Britain became a major colonial power. At home and abroad, George III's subjects engaged with a new rhetoric of liberty and radical reform as they witnessed and reacted to the revolutions in France and America. The court of King Charles II championed the right of England's social elite to pursue pleasure and libertinism. King Charles II authorized two new companies of actors. Women began to appear on stage in female roles. Dogmatism, or the acceptance of received religious beliefs, was widely regarded as dangerous. Charles II approved the Royal Society for London for the Improving of Natural Knowledge, 1662. The Royal Society revolutionized scientific method and the dispersal of knowledge. The specialized modern scientist did not exist. Royal Society members studied natural history, the collection and description of facts of nature, natural philosophy, study of the causes of what happens in nature, in natural religion, study of nature as a book written by God. The major idea of the period, founded on Francis Bacon's earlier work, was that of empiricism. Empiricism is the direct observation of experience, which infers that experience, including experimentation, is a reliable source of knowledge. John Locke, George Berkeley, and David Hume all pursued differing interpretations of empiricism, and the concept itself had a profound impact on society and literature. Writers, including women such as Mary Estelle, began to advocate for improved education for women during this period. Around 1750, the word sentiment evolved to describe social behavior based in instinctual feeling. Sentiment and the related notions of sensibility and sympathy all contributed to a growing sense of the desirability of public philanthropy and social reforms, such as charities for orphans. Increased importance was placed on the private, individual life, as is evident in literary forms such as diaries, letters, and the novel. The Stage Licensing Act 1737 established a form of dramatic censorship in which the Lord Chamberlain pre-approved and licensed all plays for performance in London. Censorship of another print material changed radically with the 1710 Statute of Anne, the first British copyright law not tied to government approval of a book's contents. Copyrights were typically held by booksellers. The term public sphere refers to the material texts concerning matters of national interest and also to the public venues, including coffee houses, clubs, taverns, parks, etc., where readers circulated and discussed these texts. Thanks to greatly increased literary rates, by 1800, 60 to 70% of adult men could read, versus 25% in 1600. The 18th century was the first to sustain a large number of professional authors. Genteel writers could benefit from both patronage and the subscription system. Grub Street hacks at the lower end of the profession were employed on a piecework basis. Women published widely. Reading material, though it remained unaffordable to the laboring classes, was frequently shared. Circulating libraries began in the 1740s. Capital letters began to be used only at the beginnings of sentences and for proper names, and the use of italics was reduced. Thank you and have a nice day.